Good evening. In the most recent election, did you vote? If you did vote, why did you vote? And if you didn't vote, same reason, same question. Why didn't you vote? Was it because you didn't care, or you just weren't sure, or were there barriers that prevented you from voting? According to the Washington Post, 66% of registered voters voted in the most recent general election. That's way more since previous years. The voter turnout this year was ridiculous. A good ridiculous, not a bad ridiculous. But that still leaves 34% of voters who didn't vote. If you take a look at this graph shows you a picture of the United States. The light blue areas are people 50%, where 50% of the state voted, and in the darker blue areas, it goes up to 75%. Sadly, in Oklahoma, only around 52% of people voted, and that didn't break the record for this year, but in many other states, it did. I have encouraged people to vote since I have been a registered voter. I have also volunteered at polling locations to make sure that everyone who casted a vote, that their vote was counted, or if there were any issues that I could maybe try and solve them so that their vote could be counted. Elections are important. They're important for the future of our country and for the well-being of our country. And even though you might not think it's important, it is, and we all need to vote. A lot of the reason that people don't vote is because there are tons of barriers. Whether they waited in line for more than an hour and they had to get back to work so they had to leave, or they didn't have a ride, or they didn't know how to register to vote, or they didn't know where their polling place was, or they couldn't physically access their polling place because of a disability. Those are just a few of the barriers that Americans have while trying to vote. This graph right here shows you people who rarely vote, people who sometimes vote, and people who almost always vote. And it gives you different scenarios. For like people who waited in line for more than an hour, a lot of people who rarely vote didn't vote for that reason, but also I want to point out that the people who almost always vote, they have the highest number of not voting because they waited in line for over an hour. Like I said, missed voter registration deadline, couldn't get off work to vote. That's a huge one. You're legally supposed to be able to do that, but sometimes it just doesn't work out like that. Couldn't find their polling place, couldn't physically access their polling place, didn't receive their absentee ballot, were told they weren't on the registered voting list, and there are a few other that you can look at on this graph. If we were all to vote from home, that would take away all of these barriers that I had just mentioned to you. And you may ask me, well, Hannah, how do we do that? How do we all vote from home? Well, absentee ballots. And the way that we do that is we need to fund the USPS, or the United States Postal Service. And that is one way that we can remove the barriers that people have voting. Our president, Donald Trump, said no to funding. He said that he was scared that because of the coronavirus, all of these mail-in ballots were going to be fraud. But he didn't put the proper tools in place to equip the United States Postal Service to make sure that happened. A quote from Forbes: President Donald Trump said Thursday that he would block a funding boost Excuse me. President Donald Trump said that Thursday that he would block a funding boost for the U.S. Postal Service to handle an expected flood of mail-in ballots in the coming weeks, admitting it's a part of the White House's effort to limit Americans voting by mail and raising chances of chaos surrounding the election in November. This graph right here shows you that the United States Postal Service has not recorded a net profit since 2006. This is what I'm talking about. If the United States Postal Service could have the funding they need, we could vote from home and we could get rid of all of those barriers. One way that we can fund the Postal Service is by sending letters. This graph right here shows you that people in the US are sending fewer and fewer pieces of mail. If the United States Postal Service were to go away, how would you get your birthday money from your grandma? Or think about it, how would small businesses support and send out their merch to the people who have bought it? In my case, how are we going to get those ballots back to the polling places? All in all, we need both the U.S. Postal Service and we need to vote. Both of them are what will make our future work. Voting by mail or an absentee ballot will help us vote from home and remove the barriers. I am calling all of us to support the United States Postal Service and get the funding and ask for the funding they need to remove the barriers of voting. Thank you, and I hope that you will all support the United States Postal Service and you will vote in your next election.